Hello, a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining in. I'm Saeed, and I'm here with my colleague Annegret representing Coach Transformation Academy. Nice to see you all. Coach Transformation Academy is a globally recognized coach training and mentoring institute offering world-class certifications accredited by the International Coaching Federation, International Mentoring Center, European Mentoring and Coaching Council, and the Society of Human Resources Management. If you'd like to learn more about our programs, please feel free to write to us. We'll be sharing our contact email in the chat shortly. To ensure you receive one ICF CCE and one IMC MDC, we kindly request you to be on camera for the next 60 minutes, please. Participation certificates will be issued by Friday. And it's time to introduce today's speaker, Fiona Young. She's an ICF-certified coach, a two-time TED speaker, author, and a DEI consultant with over 8 years of coaching and consulting experience. Fiona, a very warm welcome to you. We're excited to hear what you have in store for us today. Over to you.
Thanks so much for the warm welcome, Saeed. Thanks everyone for dialing in today. Such an amazing audience. So I think we have lots of different countries represented. I must say I hardly have the opportunity to coach fellow coaches, so definitely excited about today. As Saeed already mentioned, I am focused a lot around DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. And right now I'm actually dialing in from Malaysia. So I was born in Malaysia, but I grew up in Germany, spent about 25 years there, had a short stint in the US, worked out of the UK, and then was expatriated to Hong Kong in 2010. I lived in Hong Kong for about 13 years before eventually moving back or relocating to my roots here in Malaysia. So coming full circle, very exciting. And as Saeed already mentioned, I've been partnering with multinational organizations, with MBA schools, NGOs, really focusing on creating inclusive environments so that everyone can thrive. And not only doing that in person or as an executive coach, but also running a lot of webinars like these and making sure that we get the knowledge out there to ensure that everyone understands what kind of role that they could play in order to make the world a little bit more inclusive. So why am I so passionate about DEI is because I am a third culture kid. I actually wrote a book about my experience as well, growing up as a Malaysian Chinese individual in Germany when I was 3 years old, not knowing the language at all, and also bullied for the way I look. Because when I grew up in Germany in the 80s, in the 1980s, there weren't any Asian kids in school, in fact. So I also started off my career in corporate. So in the early 2000s, I joined oil and gas. I was working for Shell in Germany, and my first role was actually a finance role in the refinery. And you can imagine the challenges that I had to go through because I was the only Asian, one of the very few females in the refinery, and definitely one of the youngest individuals. So diversity checkbox check. And unfortunately, I was also labeled as the diversity token by some of my peers. And that also, not only hurt me, but I was also wondering whether I only received opportunities, promotions, just because I'm Asian, I'm female, and I'm at that time quite young. So when I was working in Shell for almost 14 years in diverse locations and also in different functions, eventually, as I mentioned, I got expatriated to Hong Kong, where I also had a chance to become the first president for the Women's Network for Shell. And throughout my career in corporate, I was always involved in the space of DEI. So starting off being on the committee of the Young Graduates Network, making sure that us next generation leaders would also get a voice in the room. And then, of course, being very heavily involved in the gender equity space, and also cultural appreciation was a huge topic. So now I've left Shell since 2017, working with more than 80 different clients from 26 different industries, really supporting them to create a much more inclusive work environment. So again, everyone can thrive, and really seeing differences as a unique opportunity and not as a challenge. So today it's going to be an interactive session. It's not just going to be me talking. I think it's such an amazing opportunity to have so many executive coaches on a call. And of course, I want to hear from you as well. I would love to hear from you, your experiences around the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And I think this is a great way for us to really share best practice with one another. So I have actually dropped the Mentimeter code in the chat box. So whatever you feel is most convenient to you, you can either click on the link, or you can also use your mobile phone. Hardly the case during webinars or workshops, but in my webinar, please feel free to use your mobile phone. So you can scan the QR code on the bottom left-hand corner here, and you can ask your questions. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can ask your questions anytime. We can see each other's questions. It's anonymous though. And you can like the questions that resonate with you, so we can actually prioritize that towards the end of today's session. We will definitely be using Menti also for polling purposes and for sharing purposes. But we also have the chat box, so I'll try to toggle back and forth. Do give me some time, because there's probably a lot of messages in the meeting chat, so bear with me. But I hope that we're going to interact a lot today. So today we would love you to walk away with really understanding the unique role of us coaches in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the organizations. And I know that in certain countries, DEI has become even almost like a taboo topic. And this is a little bit different here in APAC, where I've been operating from for the past 15 years. DEI, as you can imagine, we are living in Asia, but every country is so different. There's so many cultural nuances there. DEI is still extremely relevant, very important. And luckily also the clients I'm working with globally see that as well. This is a table stake, and it's going to be staying here. And I definitely always want to ensure that it's not just about the intention of creating an inclusive work environment, it's really the impact. And I believe that we as coaches, we really want to hold our coaching clients, who are typically senior leaders in the organization, also accountable for what they are professing. So it's not just professing the message, but it's really reinforcing that with everyday behavior. So it's not just talking about DEI, it's really examining how we as coaches can really foster that equity-centric leadership. So DEI is not just something for HR. And I can tell you, I've never been in HR when I was in corporate. 14 years, I was always involved in some sort of DEI initiative. So it's not just HR these days in organizations who foster that sense of DEI. It's really about the leaders. And leaders typically work with us, executive coaches. So we have a huge responsibility and also a role to play in terms of enforcing and enhancing and embracing DEI in the workplace. And I would love to share with you some of the practical tips, some of the practical recommendations that I see working quite well with my clients, and definitely would hear from you as well. So this is not just a one-sided webinar. I'm always curious to hear about your experiences as well. And then, of course, we want to ensure that we also see some sort of DEI impact, making sure that it's also sustainable. So as I mentioned just now, we're going to be using Mentimeter to engage with one another. So you can see the QR code here. So please scan it, or just click on the link that I've dropped in a chat box. And I'm going to move over to Menti and just see your input with regards to these two questions, because I would like to gauge some understanding where you are right now when it comes to the topic DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do you incorporate that in your coaching as well. So as you can see here, the scale is from 1, meaning low, to high, being 5. So there are two questions that you can see on the screen. The first question is around how confident you are in terms of understanding the DEI principles as they relate to coaching. So how confident are you? And I can see that we're quite on middle ground, so that's great. So majority of us in today's session are about in the middle. So still, I guess, lots to learn. And then the second question is around how actively do you consider DEI aspects like identity, privilege, inclusion when you are coaching your clients? So I can see here it's around how do I even read that? Yeah, 4. Okay. I think, okay, so I can see here. So most of you are closer to the high. So 9 of you are saying you're really actively considering DI aspects, which is great. All right, so I'm just going to move back to my slides. And I wanted to share with you a quote that actually helps me and also my clients visualize what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. And this quote is a slightly modified quote by a DEI expert, Verna Myers. And she said she visualizes DEI as such. So diversity is being invited to the party. Now, back in the days, or just a couple of years ago, the emphasis was a lot around D and I. Now we incorporated also another E, which is equity. So I added that equity is making sure everyone has the adequate transportation to the party, and inclusion means being asked to dance. And I feel it doesn't stop. It should not stop at DI. It should actually really it's about really embracing belonging. So when we achieve that sense of belonging, no matter in the workplace, no matter in school or any environment we're in, when we feel like we belong, it's like we can dance like no one is watching. We can really be our true authentic self. We can speak up without the fear of negative consequences, and we can really show up authentically. So this is what DI means. Now, when it comes to why DEI matters in organizations, and maybe this is also something that perhaps some of the leaders may ask you, some of your coaching clients may ask you, because there's still a little bit of misconception about how DEI translates to also employee engagement, and impact on the bottom line. So it really means that when we embrace DEI in the workplace, it drives innovation. So when people feel that sense of belonging, they feel that they can speak up without the fear of negative consequences. They're able to share their mistakes. They're able to share their ideas without fearing that people are going to be laughing at them or that their mistakes are going to be penalized. So innovation is not about AI, it's not about robotics, it's about the people being able to share openly about their thoughts, about their ideas, even about their mistakes. So this is really helping to drive innovation and making sure that we also improve decision making, because we are making, or the business leaders are making decisions not only on behalf of their people, of their team members, but definitely also on behalf of the business and on behalf of the shareholders and definitely the customers. So when we have a more inclusive work environment, then we're also able to make decisions in much more inclusive way. We're able to understand also the various diverse stakeholders who we are serving. And of course, when we have a much more diverse and inclusive environment, work environment, it will power global expansion. Of course, I mean, there are definitely lots of research studies out there, but it definitely improves financial performance, because when our team members, when people feel that they can show up as their authentic selves, when they feel that they're being recognized, that their thoughts and their opinions are being valued, they are also much more engaged. So when they are engaged, they don't just come into the office to clock in the hours, they really want to go an extra mile. And so that actually has an impact on how they serve the customers, and of course, customer loyalty, and then essentially the bottom line impact. And this is also something that I've noticed myself. So in my last role in Shell, I was the head of customer operations. And I was leading a team of 300 individuals in APAC. So at that stage in 2016, it was actually my first leadership position. And I was extremely intimidated and terrified to be leading such a big team who is also locational wise very dispersed. So I actually decided to get myself accredited as a coach by ICF standards. And I brought in coaching aspects into Shell, which is actually the very first time, especially in customer operations. So customer operations, if you can imagine, these are individuals who pick up the phone when you have an inquiry, if you want to place an order, or if you have a complaint. These are the individuals you're going to speak to on the phone. So we have a lot of customer service representatives, but also a lot of team leaders, mid-level managers. So what we have done actually is I've incorporated coaching into the organization, help them to understand that it's important not just leading by command and control, but rather how can we embrace coaching? How can we upskill, especially our mid-level managers, to coach our team members? And during that time, we actually went through several reorganizations and also several systems changes and transformational journeys when it comes to, for example, incorporating a new e-commerce platform. So we initially expected as a leadership team that the engagement level would drop. But because at the same time, simultaneously, we also incorporated the concept of coaching the coaches in the organization, we were able to overcome that, and our employee engagement level never really dropped. And most importantly, our customer satisfaction index and also our net promoter score even increased because of the level of coaching that we have embedded in the organization. So I can tell you firsthand, it definitely worked. I mean, first of all, it was transformational for me as an individual, but definitely I felt very proud also how our team leads embrace the idea of coaching their team members. And of course, when we are working, especially in a multinational corporation, we want to attract diverse talents. We want to attract also younger talents. A lot of my clients now are really struggling, especially those who are from traditional industries like finance and banking, oil and gas, chemicals. They're really struggling to find young talents to join the organization. So oftentimes, I also talk and conduct sessions around how to attract, retain, and engage the next generation talents. So if you want to hear more about that, feel free to connect with me separately. But maybe some of you would like to also see some stats. So I included some stats here. So just for you to understand that DEI is not just a nice to have, it's not just nice and fluffy, it's really where we can see certain metrics increase. And by the way, we also tracked our metrics in Shell at that stage. So we encountered a 30% increase in employee engagement after 18 months that we have implemented the coach-to-coach program. So we saw personally also really great improvements. Now, DEI programs that transform work, they are also boosting productivity and morale. So you can see here the blue chart is McKinsey. So they are seeing that diverse teams are 35% more productive. For Gallup, inclusive teams see 21% higher engagement. In Verizon, the amber colored bar, 20% uptick in project completion rates. And then the red bar, which is Johnson & Johnson, by the way, they focus a lot also on holistic well-being. This is where we want to create that psychological safety, making sure that we also understand mental well-being in the workplace. So 8% below industry norms when it comes to turnover. So there are definitely statistics there, workplace metrics that we can utilize to also showcase to our clients that, hey, DEI is not just a fluffy, nice to have, cozy feeling. It's really, it does have an impact. There is a return on investment. Now, how do we as coaches actually utilize that unique power of DEI? So obviously, we know that we are great sounding boards to leaders. I'm now coaching a senior vice president for an FMCG. Him and I, we both share similar roots. We're both Germans. He's Caucasian German, now working in Malaysia, and definitely still struggling with regards to that cultural difference. So we are definitely sounding boards. And I think this is also a way for us as coaches to really ensure that we ask questions that's helping them to reflect on the biases that they may have and certain assumptions that they're making, maybe even some blind spot. And in that space, when we have the coaching conversation, it's definitely, we all know that based on the ICF standards, without any judgment. Of course, as a coach, we also want to help them understand how to build up that EQ, having these reflective conversations, and just this open-mindedness. So I'm working now with this coaching client, and for him, he mentioned it's the very first time that he's working with an executive coach with a focus on DEI, and it comes in a timely manner, because now they're actually working on a cultural shift, how to embed a new culture in the organization. So this is also something that I'm seeing a lot of appetite right now. So it's not only about meeting the business goals, meeting the KPIs and the targets, really about how can we embrace the human-centric leadership style. And I think for us as coaches, we hold our clients accountable. I do also run a lot of workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just for leaders, but every level in the organization. And what I found very helpful is that after the workshop, we actually have individual coaching sessions so that we sustain that momentum. We want to make sure that it's not just an informative workshop, but actually they can walk away with something that they're going to implement, that they are being encouraged to take action. And this is really important. We're not just talking about all these ideas, but how can we make that sustainable change in behavior, and also ensuring that it doesn't stay only on the top level, but how can we help them to cascade it all the way down? Because for me, everyone in the organization has a role when it comes to being an advocate, a DEI champion. You don't have to be an HR person. You don't have to be a business leader. I also talk to interns, management trainees, and I always tell them that we all have a role to play when it comes to driving inclusion in the workplace, and everyone can be a champion. So I believe that we as coaches, we really want to connect the hearts and minds, not just focusing on the business, but essentially when we can connect the heart and the mind, the emotions, and of course our logical brain, the impact on the business will definitely naturally be seen. So with that, would love to hear from you. What are some of the DEI challenge? What are some of the DEI challenges that your clients are facing? Are you aware of those? So I'm just going to move to the next slide. So give me 1 second to move over. So would love to hear from you whether you have any awareness with regards to the challenges, the DEI challenges that your clients are currently facing. So would be interesting to hear whether or not there are some common themes around diversity challenges. Yeah, so I'm just going to give you a bit of time to log in your comments, your statements, challenges that your clients are particularly facing. Okay, so while we're waiting for your input, I see Mansoor, you're raising your hand. So yeah, let's see if you have any questions.
Hi, Fiona. I am a great supporter of DEI, but I do notice a few things. over the last 60, 70 years, we've had affirmative action in the US. We've had, I suppose, at a similar level, you're talking from Malaysia, the Bhumi Putra thing. And recently, as you already mentioned on this call, President Trump, of course, being a vocal opponent of this, and they're drumming out all the LGBT folks out of the US military, blah, blah, blah. We've all seen that. This will obviously have a negative effect across corporations, many of whom I feel were begrudgingly signing up to this sort of thing because of social pressure. So one of the, as I said earlier, I'm a big supporter of this. However, I do feel, and I've worked for 2 mega corporations for nearly 40 years. One of the things I do notice is a little bit of cynicism within the company regarding DEI, where they feel that you're compromising the best talent possibly available by doing this. Yeah. Just this morning, I'm in Dubai. I went in somewhere to a print shop actually, and I noticed a DEI employee there with I won't describe the condition, and she served me as well as she could. However, there was a difference in the level of efficiency, timing, etc., which I'm happy to accept. But this is the cynicism you will always encounter in companies. So how do you somehow overcome that one?
Right. Thanks a lot for your question, Mansoor. And, I'm going to look at it more from an APAC lens. So luckily, even though, of course, we hear a lot around what's happening in the States, but a lot of my clients who are MNCs, they basically don't care about that. So they still are driving DI. They use a different terminology, so it's not anymore DEI. And we also don't label people as DEI hires. I think this is actually going against the whole DEI concept, right? Cynicism will always exist. I mean, I was the president for the Women's Network. I was on the committee for the Young Graduates Network in corporate. And there will always be individuals who feel that, hey, why do we need a women's network? Why shouldn't we have a men's network? I think what helps is to also look at data and statistics. I mean, that definitely helps. We work very closely with NGOs here in Asia, namely DIAN, Diversity and Inclusion Asia Network, to really look at stats and details. And if we have certain individuals who we're working with who are not agreeable to that, to be honest, I think sometimes it's also just good to provide the stats and some case studies for them to understand that this is not just a nice to have. So I want to walk away from the DEI label, but I do appreciate you mentioning this, because again, I'm working very closely with APAC. At this stage, at least the clients I'm working with and the coaching clients I'm working with really believe that DEI is important. And I think also that's the reason why they reach out to me, right? Why would they if they don't believe in DEI? So I'm just going to look at some of the feedback that you've mentioned. The challenges that you're facing or your clients are facing is around the buy-in from the top. There's unconscious bias, inherent perception and belief, gender roles, promotional and salary based on passports. And I am definitely a huge DEI advocate, obviously, but I also do believe that things need to happen on merit. So it needs to be the right person to be hired on the role. But I think it also it's also important to understand that, especially when it comes to gender, and there are lots of research out there. Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote the book Lean In, and created that whole movement around Lean In, they found out that men would apply for a job if they are confident enough that they can meet the criteria, whereas women would want to meet 100% of the criteria before they even apply for that job. So again, I'm working with my clients to also help them understand how can we create much more inclusive job descriptions, for example, so that we can encourage individuals to also apply for that roles.
Yeah, Fiona, just to add one small thing, 34 of my 40 plus years were in Asia Pacific, in Singapore, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Philippines, etc. So I've noticed this, maybe cynicism is the wrong word, but amongst the other employees, that slight feeling of whatever. As I said, I'm a big proponent, fan of this, but how do you, I just struggled always with it. Anyhow, yeah, I've taken enough time, so I'll bow
So in
out.
the interest of time, because we only have 1 hour, right? So let me maybe just go through the slides and see whether or not this is going to answer your questions. If not, we can have like an offline discussion as well. All right. So I can also see here that certain individuals are saying that in a country where there is open separation between nationalities, how can they have impact on DEI within their organization? Men who have not considered their gender identity, which makes it very hard for them to get the issues. We're going to talk about that as well. We're going to be looking at the identity wheel. So someone, I guess, from Kenya. Some don't even know that they can be included. Children living with disabilities are often excluded. They have never known a different lifestyle. They grow up to be unaware. And that's why we're there. We're creating that awareness. I'm not trying to change everyone to be DEI champions. I personally want to just create an awareness level so that people understand also in terms of their identities, whether they're speaking out of privilege. So lots of great insights here. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm just going to go back to my slides and just highlighting something that I wanted to mention with regards to a very specific bias. So there are, by the way, more than 250 cognitive biases out there. Yeah, it's crazy. There's so many. I wanted to point out one which happens a lot, especially when we're working with working with senior leaders. And this is the affinity bias, which is, the birds of a feather, they flock together. So just giving you a context, a senior leader is believing that they are fair to everyone. They are treating everyone the same way they want to be treated. But again, this golden rule of treating everyone the same way they want to be treated, that just doesn't function because everyone is an individual. So when it comes to affinity bias, and this is where you can also be much more mindful when you're having conversations with your coaching clients, is whether or not they're supporting individuals in their organizations who are very similar to them, who have gone to the similar university, who have had a similar background, who have a similar interest. So I think it's really important that we do highlight that to them by asking questions, providing, feedback, and just to make sure that they also shift to a much more inclusive way of hiring, for example. So as I mentioned before, definitely the right person should be hired for the role. It's not about their diversity labels, and I definitely personally can resonate with them. Even individuals who are who get the feeling that they may be diversity hires, token hires, they would also feel extremely negative about that, right? They would feel like an imposter and they wouldn't be able to show up as the best version of themselves. So this is where, working with senior leaders, you can help them identify, certain biases that they may have. Very often it's also the affinity bias. People who they coach themselves, who they mentor, are they individuals who are very similar to them, similar walks of life, or are they actually looking outside of their natural network? Just wanted to check in with you because I hear that often as well. Clients want to hire people who fit their culture. Yeah, we hire for cultural fit. What do you ask, or what is your feedback to that? How do you respond to that? So when your client wants to keep on hiring people who fit the culture, is there something that you could highlight to them? How would you ask? How would you ask them? Yeah, Umair. Yes, you raise your hand.
Hi, Fiona. Yes. Usually when I talk to my clients when it comes to DI and culture argument, essentially is a cohesion of both. It's a culture which comes in terms of the values that you hold, and what are those values? You need to be able to come to the conclusion of that. And DI brings all those positive values, in fact, enhances them. That sort of just reinforces the cultural argument when I get to talk to my clients.
Great. Thanks, Omar. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else would like to share? If your client's just really enforcing that idea of, I want to hire for cultural fit, what do you require to get the best outcomes? Great. Tell me more about the culture. I like to ask the question. I also like to just throw in, like, is it about the cultural fit, or is it also, a cultural add? Because we want to embrace diversity, we want to embrace inclusion. And if we're hiring for cultural fit, basically, if everyone has the same thoughts, same ideas, same opinions, so you won't even have that diversity of thought. So when you are hiring, it's not just about the identity labels that we see on the surface, like gender, sexual preferences, ability. It's also about what's beneath the surface. And for me, it's really about diversity of thoughts. I'm now reading a book by Adam Grant called Think Again. And one of the chapters is actually talking about hiring misfits, hiring people who are disagreeable. And it's about being disagreeable with the principles, but essentially you hire people who also have the same values. And I think this is really about being value driven rather than having the same thoughts, the same ideas, because then you are not able to innovate. Yes, Omar, I'm not sure whether you raised your hand again or whether it was just from previously. I think maybe it was just from.
Yeah, yes, I actually did raise my hand again, if it's okay with you.
Yes, please go ahead.
I just want to share a very quick anecdote from one of my clients, which is Haley in Pakistan. And it was a very wonderful in-depth study that I got to do with the CEO directly. And when it comes to culture, again, this is DI, but this is gender-specific DI. And when it comes to sales, a culture of sales, and that too in Pakistan, when it's pharma company, it is extremely man club oriented. It is rare to hear a woman in the field of the sales. And now this is field work with the cultural elements within the macro scale of Pakistan is very, very different as well. I mean, in the urban scale of Karachi, for example, the women employment has actually gone down, surprisingly speaking. But when I got into it and they stuck to their guns from top to bottom, there's one particular incident which sort of changed the entire thing of culture. So in the meetings, the sales meetings was all, you can imagine the man's cave, right? It smells of tobacco, the language, the body language, the wardrobe, everything was man's cave-like. When that carried on to their customers, to their vendors, it carried further. But when they got the women in place, internal culture changed. And it changed drastically eventually. And when it went externally, the external culture changed. And the dealing, everything became more respectful, more regarded, more nuanced, more aesthetic, which in fact increased their sales as a revenue, which you were saying about a little earlier as well. So it eventually done so. And in one particular case, which I always like to cite, was there was a lady who was in the sales team who was harassed by one of the vendors. And now this is obviously an unfortunate truth, which is a great probability that exists. The CEO himself took the case on himself and went to the competitors and said, this particular vendor has done so without and has not even apologized. So we're boycotting him. If you wish to join us, we'd appreciate it. And they did, to the point where the vendor came down to the knees and apologized, and therefore the culture in the street changed. And my point being, not only does the organizational culture change, and lots of the arguments that we get is people bring these values and cultures from the society that they come from, this can actually impact society and therefore impact sales and market scale as well.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Omar. And I mean, I like to ask the question, which kind of essentially boils down to that hopeful impact. I like to ask my clients the question around, how does your team actually reflect the stakeholders you serve? And I myself was in customer operations, and typically the customers we serve are at that stage millennial women. So we also we need to be aware of what's happening externally, the whole demographics, and then mirror that also with our organization. So this is also something that we can help our clients, our coaching clients, to bear in mind. So lots of really great questions that I'm seeing here on the board. I'm definitely going to be sharing this with you after the session as well. So I'm learning a lot from you. Now, let me move back to the slides. There is also another coaching client. And by the way, this is something that happens a lot here when I'm working with MNCs. And typically they are, Western based, or at least the headquarters are Western based. And then they have their regional headquarters, their regional offices here in APAC. Oftentimes what I hear is that, even yesterday, I was getting onboarded for an event, and people were saying that here in the region, don't even think that people are going to speak up, and we need to invite them because they're typically very introverted. Typically, Asians would get the label of being shy, being quiet. So a lot of senior leaders I'm working with in MNCs, they are from Europe, they are from the US, so they're from a little bit more extroverted society. And there's actually research that the US is the most extroverted society in the world. So then they come to Asia and they still have that concept of, that certain leadership qualities include being extroverted, being vocal, being expressive. So one of the regional sales head I'm coaching, she's actually from a global FMCG company from Europe. It's really struggling with low engagement levels, also high attrition since she's come into the play here in APAC. So we also looked into the, in our conversation in terms of how this particular leader is identifying top talent. Again, does it always have to be someone who is the most vocal in the room? And then we noticed that she noticed herself through questioning that there are biases towards, those who are more assertive, more extroverted. So it's really about opening the eyes of certain senior leaders who are new to the East to understand that it's not necessarily that people are being more shy or being more quiet. It's about how can we ensure that people feel that they have this safe space, even though, of course, the power distance in Asia is larger than, let's say, I used to work in Germany. I grew up there. The power distance over there is not as large. But how can we ensure that we can still ensure that we invite people in the room who are not necessarily the ones who would speak up? And it doesn't have to be in a team meeting. It doesn't have to be in a huge town hall. But how can we actually have those conversations so that we don't miss out on those ideas from our diverse and quiet team members, so that they are not being overlooked? Some of the things that, again, like, why is it so important in terms of, why are you so important as a coach in terms of DEI? Again, their biases, and oftentimes also hidden in good intentions. And I was still working in Shell at that time when I was hearing a peer saying that he would not want to overload a team member who has just returned back from maternity leave. He didn't want to overload her with another project because she just came back from maternity leave. But actually, it was a little bit of a bias, because if he could just ask her whether or not she would like to be involved in that project, that would take away all the assumptions, right? So I always believe that also certain biases are hidden in good intentions. And I think it's also about how can we help our coaching clients to balance the focus on people and on the task and on performance. So some of them feel, and I think Mansoor, you mentioned that as well, how can we help them to remove that fear that when we focus on equity, it's not necessarily meaning that it's also lowering performance standards. And it may takes some time, obviously, but it's about doing things differently, because otherwise you're just going to stagnate. And I think this is about really embracing this whole concept of rethinking, relearning, and making sure that you don't only have yes-sayers in your team. I also feel that, as coaches, we don't all need to be experts in all the identities that are out there. I think importantly is we are humble, we act out of humility. We also have the courage to ask questions, bold questions, and to hold that space. So I think humility is a huge aspect, or a huge asset to have, because not everyone is able to put themselves in someone else's shoes. And I think it's really about asking questions, being respectfully curious as well. And when we create that sense of belonging, it's really about creating that psychological safety. It does start with leaders. When we make sure that people feel safe to speak up, then this is where not only the beauty happens, but this is where innovation can happen. And of course, little actions. And again, it doesn't only have to be with, as a leader or as HR. It's really about the little actions that can have a huge impact on changes. So I actually run a lot of workshops on inclusive language, and this is very important, so that we're working in a global environment. Not everyone's native language is English. We are also communicating in a remote environment, so that requires additional skill sets as well. So this is definitely also something that we need to be looking into. Mahir, I acknowledge that you've raised your hand, so maybe we can park that and give me a few more moments so that I can finish through. I don't really want to miss out any points. So if we have still some time, I'll address your questions or your statements. So bearing in mind, again, some of the coaching principles or practices that could support inclusion, being aware of the biases, especially the key biases like confirmation biases, affinity bias, and performance bias. I think one question that I like to ask is also who's not in the room. Yeah. The other question I like to ask is also to my coaching clients, who feels safe bringing bad news to you? And this is how we can also overcome that systemic thinking that's going to happen in the workplace when we're not addressing biases. And again, there are more than 250 cognitive biases out there, and they're not just functioning, in one, like just as an individual. There's also a combination of multiple biases at the same time. So definitely a very complex situation. Again, equity is a huge topic. So it's not about treating everyone the same way I want to be treated, but it's actually about understanding, if we operate from an equitable work environment, we're able to provide the individual the necessary and adequate resources so that they can thrive and that they can be the best version of themselves. And I think it's really about, us as coaches asking those questions, bold questions that might actually be avoided. Again, maybe you may have someone you're working with who's very cynical, doesn't really believe in these fluffy things. So I think this is where we can start up the conversation. Again, I'm not trying to change someone's mind, but at least provide some sort of awareness level. I've mentioned this already, and I wanted to talk a little bit around systems thinking or systemic thinking. This is where we also want to highlight to our coaching clients how their personal behavior actually leads to systemic impact, because they are top management. They are sometimes even C-suite level. And so systemic thinking or systemic impact, for example, could be around culture of silence, or inclusion. So people who are speaking up more in meetings, they are going to get, they have the seat at the table, they are the voice for everyone else. So how can we ensure, especially in this part of the world, this part of the region, how can we ensure that even those who are much more quieter are also getting a voice out there? The other aspect is also around recognition practices. So are we recognizing the achievements but not really focusing on the collaboration. Because if that happens, then competition is being more in the forefront. So we're prioritizing competition over teamwork. The other aspect is also around unequal opportunity pipelines. I mentioned just now there are biases, but also hidden with good intentions. So again, key projects, who are they being allocated to? Are they being allocated to because of affinity bias? Or also those who are much more vocal and people who are perhaps, minorities from minority groups are actually overlooked for certain advancements or certain projects. Obviously, also some impact around organizational risk culture. So it's really embracing diversity of thought, it's embracing those who are misfits, those who are disagreeable, because when we have a culture where we're openly able to talk about mistakes and see those as learning opportunities, we really avoid fostering that blaming culture. And something that we've done in Shell is actually, as a leadership team, we created a monthly award called Moments of Truth. And we encourage our team members globally to submit their stories where they actually made a mistake. And it's not about putting them in the limelight and finger pointing because they are making a mistake, but rather sharing that globally, and not only the mistake, but rather the learning opportunity. Because when it happens in custom operations in Hong Kong, it may also happen to the custom operations team in UK. So we've really fostered that, and the winner each month will get a token of appreciation, and that's how we really foster that sense of speaking up and really seeing mistakes as learning opportunities. And I also wanted to share with you, this is, by the way, something I always receive great feedback on, is the social identity wheel. And these days I highlight a lot of my webinar topics around intersectionality, because there are multiple identity layers. It's not just gender, not just LGBTQ+, disability. There's so much more out there, and it's about raising awareness of power and privilege. And Omer, you mentioned about the workplace harassment. I was also conducting a workplace harassment workshop regionally, and I had one of the senior leaders mention to me that in their environment, this is something completely new to them. They have never heard about any workplace harassment. And for me, this comes from a point of privilege, or that space of privilege. So as you can see here, this is the social identity wheel. And inside the wheel in the middle, you can see these are the social identities that have more of a privilege. And then the outer layer are the marginalized groups. And power does equal privilege. And if you don't, obviously we all know what privileges mean, but in this particular aspect, it's really about having the resources, the social power that's typically unearned, but is readily available to certain people because of their social group membership. Now, a quote that I love, which I have no idea who mentioned this, but this resonates very deeply with me, is that privilege is when you think something is not a problem because it's not a problem to you personally. And I conduct all of my sessions mainly in English, and I conduct it especially in this part of the world where English is typically used in the office, but it's not everyone's native language. So this is where I also need to bear in mind the terminologies that I'm using, the jargons, the idioms. So I want to make my sessions accessible for everyone. So again, I have people come up to me and tell me that they feel that they are not as experienced or not as professional even enough because they feel that their English is not great. So I really like this quote, and this also kind of reminds me of that senior leader in the workplace harassment workshop who said that in his environment, he had never even heard about workplace harassment. But then another colleague, a female colleague, really opened his eyes with a story that she shared. So I'm not sure whether we have still some time, but maybe we can do a quick round of reflection. You can see here the QR code. Again, I'm going to be moving over to Mentimeter. And let me just move to the next slide. All right, so there's the first question. Where have you seen bias, privilege, or exclusion come up in coaching or gone unspoken? And you can either type, or you can also raise your hand to share your situation, your experience. Would be great to hear. Where have you seen bias, privilege, or exclusion come up in coaching or even gone unspoken? So when I'm coaching this German senior leader here in Malaysia, definitely he is a very vocal individual, someone who moves very quickly, someone who thinks very quickly. So this is also trying to help him to reflect that not everyone is the same way, and that he may need to give people some space and time to actually digest the question, first of all, and then to come up with their own ideas. Thank you for the feedback. So someone is saying leaders filtering their inherent biases and beliefs. Yep, probably being unaware of those as well. During promotions, involvement in decision-making, kind of dismissive leaders, okay? Through uncritical examination of a problem or supposedly bad behavior from a colleague, lack of thinking about intersectional oppression and power dynamics, yes. When we had the workshop around workplace harassment, we also focus a lot on inclusive leadership. And we also highlighted to the leaders that when you see, for example, all of a sudden, surprising low performance of an individual, it may not necessarily be because lack of competency, but it might be something that's happening in the workplace, maybe some bullying, maybe some, again, oppression, discrimination that's going on. It doesn't have to go all the way down to sexual harassment. Verbal harassment is a huge thing. That's number one, in fact, before even sexual harassment. And people don't even speak up when they are being verbally harassed. That's very seldom. But when people speak up and share that with the leaders, that means that it has happened at least 3 times already based on research. And this is really high time to address these issues. In early stage sessions with clients before rapport and trust is fully in place. Yeah, obviously, it takes some time to establish that trust. Senior executives are the only ones selected to train as coaches. The organization won't pay for others. Okay, so I would say I am quite fortunate to work with organizations who are focused on emerging leaders. So they're not necessarily new joiners, interns, or management trainees, but I am running leadership programs especially focused on emerging leaders, those who are in their first leadership position or about to become a leader themselves. And this is maybe also a great way for you to connect with your with HR, see whether there is some appetite around that space. I work a lot with NGOs as well. I work a lot as mentors for fellowships, and even if we are not showing up as an executive coach, but perhaps we can support the young talents, emerging leaders, to be much more aware of how important DEI is. All right, I know it's already on the dot, so let me just quickly wrap it up, give you a quick recap. Again, making sure also that we align the DEI goals, making sure that we understand the leadership pipeline, engagement levels, retention. So when we talk about DEI, I always make sure that my clients understand what is actually their goal. And then, of course, they always want to understand how can DEI actually have a bottom line impact. So these are some ways to also see the shift. Again, I always tell them it doesn't happen overnight. Cultural shift takes some time. So I think this is also something that we have to bear in mind and share that with our coaching clients, how to track the changes. And I think for us as coaches, we can also surface some trends to our coaching clients. But as you know, we should be avoiding saviorism. So again, I personally don't have all the answers as well. And I think that's something that we've learned, right, in the ICF coaching, that we are not the ones who have all the answers there, but it's really about us being enablers, not fixers. It's about asking those questions non-judgmentally and really embracing humility that we don't know everything, and that's okay. So maybe we can have a bit of time. There's a last question. I think that's kind of what I would love to hear from you. What is one change that you'll make in your coaching after today's session? And I know we're past the time, so maybe you can take some time to just input that. And I am just going to flash the final slide here. So if you're happy to talk a lot more around DEI, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We actually have a DEI blueprint newsletter, which comes out every 2 weeks. So please feel free to subscribe that. On a fun note, I am also a podcast host. My podcast is called The Thriving Misfits, where I am interviewing not only DEI leaders globally or senior leaders and HR directors, but also individuals who have amazing stories to tell from all walks of life. And this is really about how we can embrace diversity and learn from people's resilience and really get inspired. So you can definitely tune in on Spotify if you want to know more. We also have it on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube. So thank you so much, CTA, for having me today. I know we've overran. There's lots of insights also from today's participants. So I'm sorry that we couldn't address all of your questions, but please feel free to reach out separately and individually. And I'm going to pass it back to Saeed.
Thank you, Fiona.
By the way, before
yes.
that, maybe we can do a quick group photo for those who are still online. Maybe you
yes.
Because hardly the case, by the way, that I get everyone on the screen, because usually my webinars, everyone's hiding their faces. So Anya, my team member, Anya, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, Anya.
Okay, is everyone ready?
All right.
With a 1, 2, 3 and a smile.
Yes, I'll count 2, 3 and everyone smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, perfect. One more time.
Great. Sure.
One more time.
Yes.
1. Thumbs up. Everyone free pose, thumbs up. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Yes. Thank you so much, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. But it was a wonderful session today, Fiona. And I see that people are still there, but we already, we've done with the time. We're all set. So our YouTube channel will be having the recording soon, so you can definitely view it there. And it was great to have everyone here, and looking forward to seeing you again in our next transformational talks. Goodbye for now.
Bye, everyone. See you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
for that
Bye.
session.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you.
I've messaged you on LinkedIn.